It's the worst kept secret in Wall Street that companies like Nvidia and Supermicro have been inflating their revenues by illegally selling GPUs into China with impunity. Although the companies insist that all their sales are export compliant, it's been painfully obvious to anyone who bothered to look that billions of dollars worth of Nvidia GPUs were being sold into China using fronts for Chinese companies hiding in plain sight in countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and the UAE. The financial press has largely ignored this story and in some cases gone out of their way to label it as misinformation or conspiracy theory. That is right up until a few weeks ago when Chinese AI startup DeepSeek threw the whole AI mania into chaos when they released their new model that is open source, far more efficient, cost-effective, and apparently was trained on those export-restricted Nvidia GPUs. What's up, guys? I'm nobody special, and starting in the fall of 2023, the United States put very strict export controls on the sale of advanced AI chips into China. It was no longer legal to sell those coveted H100 GPUs to Chinese customers out of fear that that technology might be used by the Chinese military. Now, right around the time those controls went into effect, a guy on Twitter named Kakashi began to point out some suspicious things in Nvidia's financial reporting. It seemed right as those export controls were going into effect, all of a sudden Nvidia started selling an awful lot of GPUs to Singapore. And Kakashi's theory was that Nvidia was bypassing those export controls by selling to front companies in Singapore. Now, that's a theory that was immediately dismissed and ridiculed, even though upon closer examination, it became very obvious to myself and several others that that is exactly what was going on. And of course, the moment AI stocks started to sell off last week, that dismissal and denial and ridicule abruptly did a 180 and turned into common knowledge and widespread acceptance with this little clip of Alexander Wang, the CEO of Scale AI on CNBC.
You know, the Chinese labs, they have more H100s than people think. You know,
and these are the highest powered NVIDIA chips that they were not supposed to have.
Yes. My understanding is that DeepSeek has about 50,000 H100s, which they can't talk about, obviously, because it is against the export controls that the United States has put in place.
And with that, right on cue, the financial press picked up this story. We got this one in Bloomberg on January 30th. U.S. probing if DeepSeek got NVIDIA chips from firms in Singapore. NVIDIA says it insists that customers comply with laws, and Singapore accounts for about 20% of NVIDIA's revenue. Officials in the White House and Federal Bureau of Investigation are also trying to determine whether DeepSeek used intermediaries in the Southeast Asian nation to purchase NVIDIA chips that the U.S. has banned from sale to China. And of course, who better to defend NVIDIA's honor than this guy, none other than Theranos pumping, FTX touting media personality, Jim Cramer, who had this to say on Twitter. Lots of misinformation flying around about NVIDIA today, including questions about Singapore and the Chinese. And then Cramer would go on to parrot a press release from NVIDIA. The revenue associated with Singapore does not indicate diversion to China. Our public filings report bill to, not ship to locations of our customers. Many of our customers have business entities in Singapore and use those entities for products destined for the U.S. and the West. We insist that our partners comply with all applicable laws, and if we receive any information to the contrary, act accordingly. That's according to this NVIDIA spokesperson and Jim Cramer. And while Jim Cramer is busy labeling this as misinformation, as if that doesn't virtually guarantee it to be true in the 2020s, we got something completely different from the Department of Justice and the Commerce Department in the Federal Register on January 15th. Check this one out in the Framework for Artificial Intelligence Diffusion. Credible, open-source reporting has identified People's Republic of China companies that have used foreign subsidiaries in a range of uncontrolled destinations to buy ICs, that's integrated circuits, subject to ear controls. Ear controls being Export Administration regulations. And if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to go ahead and take a moment to sit back and bask in that. Now, there was one more important detail about this FBI and White House probe into DeepSeek and where they got their chips, and I found it hiding in this one in Reuters on February 1st. Organized AI chip smuggling to China has been tracked out of countries including Malaysia, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates. And those three countries jumped right out of the page at me because that overlaps with another story that I was covering last year. In February of 2024, I released this video about a mysterious company called Hyperscale Nexus. Now, the cover story was that this new AI startup out of the UAE was merging with a US penny stock marijuana company called American Cannabis. The combined company claimed they were buying 30,000 Nvidia H100 GPUs to build out data centers, but with the help of an anonymous melonhead, we exposed that this company was actually being run by a known money launderer who shared the same Dubai office as Daniel Kinahan, the leader of the biggest drug cartel in Europe. We also exposed that all $1.1 billion of the chips Hyperscale Nexus was buying were being sourced by a Chinese company called X-Fusion. Just 3 days after I published that video, the merger collapsed and Hyperscale Nexus disappeared. Now, for me, the most amazing thing about this story was that no one cared. A nobody YouTuber breaking up a billion-dollar cartel money laundering and Chinese GPU smuggling operation went completely ignored by the financial media. I'll put a link to that video down below. You're going to want some popcorn for that one. Now, the reason I bring up Hyperscale Nexus now is because of the involvement of that Chinese company, X-Fusion, and that line in the Reuters article about Singapore, Malaysia, and the UAE. Hyperscale Nexus was based in the UAE, and in the last year or so, X-Fusion has established operations in both Singapore and Malaysia. Now, to be clear, I haven't been able to establish any direct links between X-Fusion and DeepSeek specifically, but I have been able to establish a pattern of how organized crime and Chinese front companies are using a web of subsidiaries in multiple countries that allows the likes of Nvidia and Supermicro to sell them restricted GPUs, and when the regulators come a-knocking, they can just play stupid and act like they had no idea these chips were going to China, even though anybody who bothers to look can easily see what they're doing. Now, you may recall from that Jim Cramer tweet and that statement from the Nvidia spokesperson that they don't actually ship the GPUs to Singapore. Singapore is just the build-to location. So the first step for any company looking to bypass these export controls is you have to set up a subsidiary in Singapore. And in the case of X-Fusion, that's exactly what happened. It turned out the company was spun off from Huawei back in 2021 when these export controls first started to be implemented. Check out this one in Bloomberg from back in November of 2021. Huawei said to sell key server division due to U.S. blacklisting. Huawei recently set up a subsidiary called X-Fusion in the provincial capital of Zhengzhou to grow business related to Kunpeng-based technologies. So you can see right here the very reason for X-Fusion's existence was because Huawei couldn't buy integrated circuits from American companies, and so Huawei spun off their server division and called it X-Fusion. And where did they set up that subsidiary? Well, in Singapore, of course. Again, remember, Singapore is just the build-to location, so you've got a Chinese company spun off from Huawei, establishes a headquarters in Singapore, and so Nvidia says, well, the bill goes to Singapore, and therefore we're not selling it to a Chinese company. But remember, Nvidia says they're not actually shipping the chips to Singapore, they're shipping them somewhere else, and well, those Chinese companies have an answer for that as well. Check this one out in The Edge Malaysia from November of 2023, right around the time those export controls were kicking into high gear. China-based X-Fusion to house global supply center in Penang and invest 1 billion renminbi over the next 3 years. Computing power infrastructure and services provider X-Fusion International has chosen Malaysia to house its maiden global supply center. It said the global supply center will be a key hub for X-Fusion's international market, with annual production capacity over 150,000 units of equipment, including graphics processing units or GPU servers. So you start with Chinese tech giant Huawei, you spin off their server division, you call it X-Fusion, you headquarter it in Singapore where the bills get sent, and then you ship the components to Malaysia where they're ultimately assembled into these GPU servers, and at that point, Supermicro and Nvidia just wash their hands and say, well, we didn't send any chips to China, even though the next stop is clearly China from that point on. Now, in this case, I'm only using X-Fusion as an example. Again, there's no specific evidence to say that DeepSeek got their GPUs from X-Fusion directly, but dozens of Chinese tech companies, including giants like ByteDance and Tencent, have done exactly the same thing over the last couple of years, and it's become this we don't talk about Bruno kind of story where everybody knows this is going on, but nobody talks about it because we can't say anything that might interfere with number go up in this AI bubble that is right up until it blew up in everybody's face with the release of DeepSeek last week. So that begs the question, just how big is this problem? How widespread is this GPU smuggling? And it turns out it's really laughable just how big this has gotten. Now, Kakashi was clearly first on this story. He's been all over this since November of 2023. He first started publishing his work in December of 2023, and he found all kind of examples of companies that are setting up these subsidiaries in Singapore. And then a few months ago, I started having some back-channel discussions with guys like the Orcafin from Beehive and a newcomer named Chase Merrill about just how widespread this problem really is. And we were hearing rumors that there were entire warehouses full of Supermicro servers sitting collecting dust in China. Now, we had a heck of a time proving this because it's hard to get any accurate information out of China, but we did find a mountain of anecdotal evidence suggesting that the Chinese were swimming in these export-restricted GPUs. And it turns out that not only are Chinese companies able to get their hands on all of the Nvidia GPUs and servers that they could possibly want, but the Chinese market is actually oversupplied, and they've started dumping these things in the most obscure and random of places. Check out this one in madeinchina.com. This is an Nvidia H200 server from Supermicro being sold by a distributor named Guangdong Long CC. Now, this distributor from madeinchina.com, Guangdong Long, they operate under a couple of different business names, but the general manager is this guy, David He. And boy, did we find some interesting things on his Facebook page. Here's a picture from David's Facebook showing what appears to be a room full of Supermicro servers. And here's another picture from David's Facebook showing what appears to be a warehouse full of Supermicro servers. Here's a shot from David's Facebook taken outside that shows a whole lot of crates, all roughly the same size as those crates that had Supermicro written all over them. Now, there's no way to tell exactly what these are, but they are exactly the same pallets and footprint of those Supermicro servers that they're not supposed to have. And it appears David He fancies himself something of a videographer as well, because here we go. Video taken inside Guangdong Long's buildings showing row after row of Supermicro servers. But remember, guys, Nvidia and Supermicro say they make their customers pinky swear not to sell these things to the Chinese. And it's not just madeinchina.com and this obscure distributor named Guangdong Long that are dumping these things on the open market. The Chinese market is so saturated with these chips and servers, you can even find them on Alibaba. Here showing multiple listings for H100 and H200 servers for sale from companies located in China. And you can find multiple listings for H100 and H200 servers for sale shipping from China on eBay. And if you're still not convinced of just how saturated the Chinese market is with H100 GPUs, well, you can even find them for sale on Facebook Marketplace. Shout out to Just Dario on Twitter who posted this one. And of course, when these things end up for sale on Facebook Marketplace, that begs important questions such as, is it still available? Is it from a pet-free, smoke-free home? And maybe some of those AI bros out there could offer up a little bit of clarity on how a porch pickup in Guangdong province is export controls compliant. And then we got this one from November of 2024 with this Chinese entrepreneur bragging about unboxing H100 GPUs despite the US export controls on them. And in this video, he's talking about how every company in China is doing the same thing.
手上这个就是传说中的英伟达 H100的，我们所有的中国大厂、世界大厂都在购买这款产品，但是美国呢对这款产品进行了封锁。但是我手上依然有它，英伟达的 H200显卡啊，目前市场上量产最贵的显卡，这是到货的200片，其中的一台。上一个视频啊，有一朋友，好多朋友在评论里说你这是违法的。咱们这事儿啊，咱们这确实违法，违了美国的法。特朗普会对这事儿很暴怒，对吧？我搞这些卡的这哥们儿啊，搞了2年了。 每一次的量都特别大，他上了美国的2次。
So long story short, at this point, you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to believe that all of these sales to Singapore aren't really just fronts for Chinese companies illegally buying GPUs. These companies aren't even trying to hide it, and now the market in China has become so saturated that these illegal GPUs are getting dumped in some rather hilarious places. Everyone knows what they're doing, and yet they've all turned a blind eye to it. Why? Because number go up. Companies like Nvidia and Supermicro are playing stupid, acting like they don't know that these chips are going to China, when anyone who bothers to look can easily see that that is clearly the case. The question now is, will the DOJ prosecute them for it? A company that engages in willful blindness to violations of export controls is on the hook for up to $1 million per violation, and individuals could face up to 20 years in prison. Playing dumb is not an acceptable excuse here, and there's plenty of examples in history of people being prosecuted while trying to do that. And of course, this all says nothing about the mountain of evidence suggesting widespread accounting fraud, round-tripping, and channel stuffing, and who knows what investigators are going to find now that somebody is finally bothering to look. Till next time, live small and dream big.